I used to think our house was the safest place on earth. Before everything happened, I'd tell people that living in Ridgeway Meadows, our neatly trimmed Colorado subdivision tucked between rolling plains and the shadow of the Front Range, was like growing up inside a snow globe. Predictable, quiet. Nothing ever moved that wasn't supposed to. My mom worked long shifts as a nurse. My dad traveled for a construction firm, and I spent most afternoons at school clubs or volleyball practice. Being alone in the house wasn't unusual. At 16, I'd gotten used to the rhythm of empty rooms, the hum of the fridge, the familiar creak of the hallway floorboards that only happened when the sun warmed them through the windows. That Friday in late October started like any other. The air smelled like cold pine, and the sky was the kind of clear blue that made the mountains look close enough to touch. My photography club meeting got canceled minutes before the last bell. Most kids were thrilled to escape early, but I remember wishing I'd had something to do. Anything that didn't involve going home to another quiet afternoon. I got off the bus around 2:45. The streets were still, leaves spinning lazily along gutters. When I rounded the corner to our house, the first thing I noticed was the side gate. It hung slightly open, moving just an inch back and forth in the breeze. My mom was obsessive about latching it, mostly because our dog Daisy used to push through it, so seeing it ajar felt wrong. I shrugged it off. Maybe the landscaper forgot. Then I saw the porch mat crooked, like someone had kicked it accidentally, and the ladder, an aluminum extension ladder I'd never seen before, propped against the back of the house. That was the moment my stomach tightened, but I told myself the same thing any naive, overconfident teenager would. There must be an explanation. There always had been. I wish I'd trusted the feeling instead. The house felt unusually cold when I stepped inside, like the thermostat had slipped down a few degrees. I dropped my backpack by the door and called out, "Mom? Dad?" even though I already knew they were both at work. Silence. I walked through the kitchen, glancing out the sliding glass door toward the backyard where the ladder still leaned against the siding. A chunk of unease sat heavy in my chest. I pulled out my phone, planning to text my mom, when I heard it. A soft tapping. Faint, but unnervingly precise. Coming from upstairs. At first I convinced myself it was the wind against a gutter, but then the tapping changed. Became slower. Heavier, deliberate. The sound of someone walking across the second-floor hallway. I froze at the bottom of the stairs. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding much smaller than I intended. The footsteps stopped instantly. Everything above me went dead still. Not the natural quiet of an empty house, but the thick, unnatural silence of someone holding their breath. A cold wave washed over me. Someone was up there, and they weren't supposed to be. I backed into the laundry room, the only place without direct sight lines to the upstairs landing. My hands shook as I texted my mom. Was someone supposed to come by the house? A repair guy, maybe? She replied almost immediately. "No. Why?" "There's a ladder outside." And I heard something upstairs. Her next text came so fast it buzzed before the first message finished sending. "Mara, get out, right now. Go to a neighbor's. Call 911. I crept toward the living room, trying to reach the front door quietly. But halfway across the carpet, something stopped me cold. Muddy boot prints. Big ones. Leading across the hallway. Straight toward my parents' bedroom. The house had gone silent again. Like whoever was upstairs was listening for me. I took one shaky step back toward the kitchen, heart pounding so loud I was sure the intruder could hear it. This was no misunderstanding. Someone was in my house, and they knew I was home. I ducked behind the kitchen island and dialed 911 on speaker, keeping the phone close to my mouth. 911, what's your emergency? Someone's in my house, I whispered. I'm 16. I'm alone. They're upstairs. Please hurry. The dispatcher's voice was calm and steady. Stay where you are. Officers are on the way. Are you in a safe room? No. My breath stuttered. I can hear them. A floorboard creaked above me, then another. Slow, heavy footsteps moved toward the top of the stairs. The dispatcher whispered, "Stay quiet. Help is coming." But the intruder wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. The footsteps reached the stairs, each step groaning under weight as the person descended, breathing hard like they were carrying something heavy. My throat tightened. I crouched lower behind the island, watching the edge of the stairs through the gap between cabinet and countertop. Another step, then another. A shadow stretched onto the floor. I clamped a hand over my mouth. Then, suddenly, "Mara, you home?" The voice was deep and panicked. Mr. Ramirez. He burst through the front door with a baseball bat raised high, shouting again, "Mara, where are you?" The intruder reacted instantly. The heavy footsteps pivoted, pounded back up the stairs. I heard the slam of a window, the scrape of someone climbing out, then the thud of boots hitting the ground outside. I scrambled from behind the island. "Mr. Ramirez!" He rushed to me. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, still trembling. "How did you know?" "There's a white van parked behind your fence. No plates. Haven't seen it before." His jaw tightened. I knew something was wrong. Police sirens wailed in the distance as we stepped outside together. The backyard window was wide open, curtain flapping like a loose flag in the breeze. The intruder was gone, but he hadn't left empty-handed or empty-planned. The police swarmed our street within minutes. 2 patrol cars, 1 unmarked SUV, and a K-9 unit that searched the yards. I sat on the curb wrapped in a fleece blanket one of the officers handed me, shaking so badly my teeth knocked together. My mom arrived 10 minutes later, still in her hospital scrubs, tears streaming as she hugged me so tight it hurt. My dad made it home an hour after that, his face pale under the porch lights. The officers opened the white van Mr. Ramirez had spotted. Inside they found rope, duct tape, a crowbar, a black duffel bag, a stack of jewelry that didn't belong to us, a clipboard with notes, streets, house numbers, approximate hours. Kids were usually home alone. When the detective handed my parents the page labeled Ridgeway Meadows, Fridays, I saw our address written neatly beside the words, "Teen girl, alone most afternoons, 3:30 to 5:30 window." A chill went down my spine so hard my vision blurred. "He was planning this," my mom whispered. "He was watching our house." The detective nodded grimly. "Probably for weeks." I felt the world tilt. All those times I'd walked home without noticing anything unusual. All the afternoons I'd popped earbuds in while unlocking the door. All the days I'd sat alone in the kitchen doing homework. Someone had been studying it all. By 9 p.m., the intruder still hadn't been found. The officers believed he'd escaped through the greenbelt behind our neighborhood. They'd track him, they said. They'd catch him. But I could see in their faces they weren't sure. That night we stayed at a hotel. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, hearing phantom footsteps in every creak of the building. The worst part wasn't the break-in. It was knowing the truth. He'd been inside my house. He'd walked through my hallway. He had stood just feet from where I'd been hiding, and he'd known exactly when to come. We didn't move, not immediately, but the house never felt like ours again. My parents upgraded everything. New locks, reinforced windows, cameras with motion alerts, floodlights, an alarm system louder than a tornado siren. They even trimmed the backyard trees so no one could hide behind them. But none of that fixed what had changed inside me. For weeks, I startled at every noise. The heater clicking on, the mailbox squeaking, even Daisy's paws tapping across the tile. I slept with my bedroom door locked and a flashlight under my pillow. The therapist Mom made me see said my brain was stuck in survival mode, replaying the threat over and over. She wasn't wrong. One afternoon, a month after the break-in, I came home from school and stood on the sidewalk staring at our house. Nothing looked different. Beige siding, trimmed shrubs, the porch we'd decorated with pumpkins. But my chest tightened anyway. The intruder had turned my safe place into a maze of memories I couldn't unsee. I walked inside slowly, checking each room like the police had shown me. When I reached the laundry room, the place I'd texted my mom from, I paused. I realized then that the fear hadn't beaten me. It had changed me, yes, but it had also sharpened me, made me aware, made me careful, and it reminded me of something important. I wasn't alone that day. A neighbor had noticed something wrong. A dispatcher had stayed on the line. Officers had raced to help. My parents had held me through every panic attack. The world wasn't full of monsters hiding in houses, but it wasn't full of snow globe safety either. It was full of people, good ones, bad ones, and the ones who show up exactly when you need them. I locked the door behind me and took a deep breath. I wasn't the same girl who'd walked into that house weeks ago, but I was still here, and for now that was enough. Trust your instincts, even when they don't make sense at first. Danger rarely announces itself, and safety isn't guaranteed just because something feels familiar. Pay attention, speak up, and never underestimate the value of a neighbor, a friend, or a single moment of courage. I didn't move into the Milwaukee duplex because it was charming. I moved because I had nowhere else to go. After the breakup with Kayla, I needed a place that didn't hold memories, just a roof I could crawl under after 12-hour shifts at St. Marcus Hospital. The duplex was old, drafty, and smelled faintly of wet carpet when it rained, but it was quiet, and at that point, quiet was enough. Most nights I'd come home around 9 or 10 p.m., heat up leftover takeout, and collapse on the couch with whatever sports recap was on TV. I didn't socialize much, didn't want to. The neighbors were pleasant enough, though hardly more than background characters. Mrs. Henson upstairs liked to hum gospel music. The couple next door argued about fantasy football every weekend. It was predictable, and predictability was my stability. That Thursday night started like any other late March evening. Cold, steady rain tapping at the gutters, the kind that turns the whole street into a dark watercolor painting. I parked under the flickering street lamp, zipped my jacket, and jogged to my front door. That's when I noticed him. A man stood directly under the streetlight across from my duplex, still, facing my house. His hands were shoved in his pockets, hood pulled low. He didn't move, not even when I looked right at him. I told myself he was waiting for a ride. Milwaukee gets odd foot traffic on rainy nights. I shrugged it off, locked my door behind me, and went about my routine. But something about the way he stared, motionless, patient, stayed with me long after I fell asleep. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a sound I'd never heard before inside that duplex. A thin, deliberate scraping, metal against metal. I sat up, heart thudding, and listened. The sound came again, slow and unhurried, like someone testing something. I slid out of bed and crept to the window, lifting the blinds with 2 fingers. 2 figures knelt in the mud outside. One was pressed close to my window, prying at the screen with something long and flat. The other held a small flashlight in his teeth, running the beam along the window frame like he was examining it for weak spots. Their jackets were soaked, hair plastered down from the rain. My first instinct was to flip on the light, to make noise, to show them I wasn't asleep. But the second I reached for the switch, I stopped cold. Light would show them exactly where I was. I backed away from the window, pulse pounding in my ears. The apartment was half dark, half lit, like a power surge had hit. When I tried the hallway lamp, it flickered once, then died completely. That's when I realized the truth. They had tampered with the breaker. They had planned this. I got on my hands and knees and crawled into the hallway, keeping low so my silhouette wouldn't show in the blinds. My phone sat charging on the kitchen counter, but when I grabbed it, the screen wouldn't turn on. They had cut the power hard enough to kill the outlet. Outside, one of them whispered harshly, "Check the back. He's got to have another entry." Footsteps slogged through mud, moving around the house. That was when real fear hit. Cold, heavy, suffocating. They weren't checking random houses. They wanted mine. I ducked into the coat closet beside the front door, grabbed a kitchen knife from the drawer on my way, and shut myself inside. It wasn't a smart hiding place, but it was the only space without visible light gaps. I pressed my ear to the wood, trying to control my breathing. Outside, footsteps sloshed across the soaked patio. Someone rattled the doorknob. Hard. Locked. A voice muttered. Check the laundry room window. It was loose last time. My blood ran cold. Last time? What do you mean last time? I whispered to myself. They kept talking. I told you, the first man said. Cheap lock by the laundry room. Old sliding door. He's got easy points. We've been here before. My chest tightened. I felt the closet shrink around me. They had been inside, in my home, while I was gone, walking through my rooms, planning. Is the guy even home? One asked. He works nights, right? Should be empty. Well, lights are weird. Power box messed up. Doesn't matter. Take what's easy and go. Their voices lowered, arguing quietly. Then, silence. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. 20. The next sound wasn't a whisper. It was something heavy smashing against the back patio door. Then again. Then the crack of glass splitting. That was my moment. I burst from the closet, knife in hand, barefoot and shaking. I ran straight into the garage, yanked the door open, and sprinted across the wet concrete into the neighbor's yard. The rain hit my face like needles, but I didn't stop until I reached the next house and pounded on the door. Please, open, someone's breaking in. Behind me, I heard fast footsteps splashing through puddles. They'd spotted me. My neighbor, Mr. Callahan, yanked the door open wearing pajamas and a terrified expression. Jonah, what the hell? Intruders, I gasped. 2 men. They're in my house. He pulled me inside, slammed the door, and locked it. His wife grabbed the phone and dialed 911, while I stood in their entryway dripping rain onto the rug, shaking so hard I could barely speak. They followed me, I whispered. I think they saw me run. Mr. Callahan looked out the window. Alley's empty now. They're gone. Gone. Just like that. When the police arrived, I walked them back to my duplex, every step feeling unreal, like moving through a bad dream I couldn't wake from. The back patio door hung cracked and bent inward, glass scattered like ice across the kitchen floor. Muddy shoe prints tracked through the grass, over the window frame, onto the back deck. Inside, an officer shined his light across the bedroom carpet. Footprints here, he said. This isn't from tonight. Someone's been inside at least once before. I felt my stomach twist. Detectives searched the breaker box and found evidence of tampering. Scratched screws, smudged prints, the whole thing partially pulled loose. They'd killed power to specific outlets, but not all of them. We've had a few cases like this in the area, one detective said. Targets living alone, predictable schedules, young men mostly. Why me? I asked hoarsely. You're not random, he said. They studied you, chose you. Even standing in the wreckage of my kitchen, with police all around, I had never felt more exposed. My home wasn't a home. It had been a hiding place, for them. I lasted 3 more weeks in that duplex. That was it. I tried to sleep there, tried to convince myself the locks were stronger now, that no one would come back with police watching the neighborhood. But every night, I woke at the slightest sound. The fridge clicking on, a car door slamming in the street, even rain tapping the gutters. My nerves had become a frayed wire sparking at every disturbance. Work became harder too. During overnight shifts, I'd picture the duplex sitting dark and empty, waiting for someone to test a window. And during day shifts, I'd imagine someone creeping around, learning my patterns again. The feeling never left. This place was never truly mine. I just lived there while someone else watched. I packed up on a Saturday morning in April. I didn't have much, some clothes, a TV, a few boxes of photos. But even loading my car made me anxious, like the men might step out of the alley at any second. When I handed the landlord the keys, he asked, "Everything okay?" I just said, "I can't sleep here." He nodded like he'd heard it before. Now I'm living across town in a building with security, cameras, and neighbors I actually talk to. I don't know if the men were ever caught. The detectives never called back. But I do know something important. When someone invades your home, they don't just break into your space. They break into your peace. And rebuilding that takes longer than packing boxes ever could. I inherited my Uncle Raymond's farmhouse on a cold January morning, sitting across from a lawyer who smelled faintly of cigarettes and dust. "He wanted you to have it," the lawyer said, sliding over the old iron key. I hadn't seen my uncle in years, not since he stopped coming to family holidays and chose to isolate himself at the edge of town. My parents rarely spoke of him, except to say he preferred quiet. Locals used harsher words: strange, paranoid, unwell. Still, the idea of owning land felt grounding, like a chance to rebuild something of my own. I packed up my truck and drove the 100 miles north to the farmhouse, watching the scenery shift from dull highways to lonely fields to a stretch of dirt road twisting between skeletal trees. The house sat at the end like an abandoned monument, leaning, wind-beaten, and weary. The front porch sagged. The windows looked sunken, almost tired. Inside, the place smelled of old pine and stale air. The floors groaned with every step, pipes clanking deep behind the walls like something crawling through them. I told myself renovation would fix all of it. That first night, I made simple dinner, set up an air mattress, and listened to the wind batter the siding. I was scrolling through my phone when I heard the footsteps, slow, heavy pacing across the upstairs hall, too heavy for an animal. I grabbed a broom, walked up the staircase, and whispered, "Hello?" The moment I reached the top step, the footsteps stopped. The hall was colder than the rest of the house. Still, watching. I went back downstairs trying to shake it off, but one thought clung to me like a damp shirt. I wasn't alone in that house. The next morning I made coffee and nearly dropped the mug when I saw the mud on the stairs. Fresh prints, bigger than mine, trailing from the top step into the guest room. I checked every door and window. All were locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry. I tried to be logical. Maybe Uncle Ray tracked mud months ago. Maybe I didn't notice it last night. But the prints were sharp, edges crisp, made after the rainstorm that hit while I slept. I spent the day ripping out damaged wallpaper in the living room, trying to drown out unease with labor. But the house seemed to react to me. Every time I spoke, the floor creaked under my voice. When I shut a door, another door softly unlatched somewhere else. When I whispered, "Who's there?" the hallway answered with 2 deliberate groans. By the third night, my nerves were frayed enough that I slept with a flashlight beside me. The fourth morning, I found something under the bed in the guest room, something that froze my breath in my throat. A small camcorder, still recording, its red light blinking weakly as the battery died. Someone had put it there intentionally, pointed directly at the spot where I slept. My hands shook as I loaded the footage onto my laptop. At first, it was just me sleeping, rolling over, sighing. Then a shape appeared, a tall figure in the doorway, just inside the frame, unmoving, watching. For hours. I slammed the laptop shut. This wasn't pipes settling. This wasn't old house noises. Someone was in the house with me, or they had been, recently. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe the camcorder was something Uncle Ray used years ago. Maybe the shadow was a trick of light or a glitch. But the timing felt wrong. Too specific. Too recent. That night I planned to sleep in my truck, but the storm outside was brutal. Sheets of rain, trees bending, wind screaming across the fields. Against my better judgment, I stayed inside, keeping every light on downstairs. Around 1 a.m., the house shifted. It wasn't just noise. It felt like the entire structure inhaled sharply. Then the lights flickered, buzzing like angry bees. One by one, doors throughout the house slammed shut. Not randomly, not chaotically, all at once. The sudden silence afterward was worse than the noise. "Raymond?" I whispered into the dark. I didn't know why. I just did. Then the footsteps started. Slow, heavy, coming down the staircase. Each step groaning long after it should have. Something large. Something deliberate. Something that knew I was listening. My chest tightened as the air grew colder. I felt a pressure in my ribs, like the house itself had exhaled onto me. I backed toward the front door. "I'm leaving," I warned, though my voice cracked. "I'm done. Whoever, whatever you are, I'm done." The doorknob wouldn't budge. It wasn't stuck. It was deadbolted. From the outside. Something wanted me inside. I ran for the back door. Same thing. Bolted. Unmoving. The windows rattled violently as if laughing. I grabbed the nearest chair, smashed a window, and crawled through the jagged frame into the freezing night rain. When I reached the yard, soaked and bleeding from glass, I looked up. A figure stood in the upstairs window, perfectly still, watching me. The police took 20 minutes to arrive. 20 minutes of me pacing the yard, soaked, shivering, and watching that upstairs window like it might blink. I explained everything. The footsteps, the camcorder, the locked doors, the figure watching. 2 officers searched the house with flashlights. They found no intruder, no signs of forced entry besides the window I broke. 1 officer wrote notes while the other politely tried to chalk everything up to overactive imagination, which nearly made me laugh. Then they found the mud. Footprints in the guest room, more near the attic door, none matching my size. That changed their tone. They moved with more caution after that, opening doors slowly, calling out "police" before entering each room. When they reached the attic, I stayed downstairs, shaking too hard to follow. After several minutes, 1 officer called down, "Mr. Walker, you'll want to see this." Inside the attic, dust coated everything except for a patch of rotted planks pulled aside to reveal a staircase leading down. A hidden internal staircase, long concealed. "Where does it go?" I asked. "We're about to find out." We descended into a narrow cellar smelling of mold and something metallic. The walls were lined with shelves containing objects covered in old sheets. When the officers lifted the cloth from one stack, I staggered backward. Photographs. Dozens of them. All of me. Some from years ago. Me at college, me leaving work, me at a gas station I barely remembered. Photos taken long before I moved here. I stared at them, dread sinking like wet cement in my stomach. "This isn't possible," I whispered. 1 officer shook his head. "Someone's been watching you for a long time, son. This place didn't pick you. Someone expected you." And suddenly, my uncle's odd isolation didn't feel like madness. It felt like fear. I left the farmhouse that night, escorted by police, my soaking clothes clinging to my skin, my mind spinning in every direction. I stayed at a motel on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and a TV bolted to the dresser. But it felt safer than that house, safer than all that silence and watching. The next morning, detectives questioned me for hours. They asked about my uncle's history, whether he mentioned anyone unusual. I told them the truth. Uncle Ray barely spoke to anyone in his last years. He withdrew, refused family, stopped going into town. Maybe he wasn't paranoid. Maybe he knew exactly what lived, or hid, in that house. A few days later, the detective called. They found nothing new. The hidden cellar held only the photographs and a few belongings they assumed were my uncle's. No fingerprints. No footprints besides mine and the mud from before. Whoever, or whatever, had been there left nothing behind. I didn't go back. I signed paperwork to put the house up for sale as is and let the state handle the rest. I just wanted distance. Miles, states, oceans if possible. Anything to escape that window and the figure watching. Even now, months later, I still wake up some nights thinking I hear floorboards creaking in answer to my breath. I still check closets twice. I still sleep with the hallway light on. Because the worst part isn't the figure I saw. It's the photographs proving that long before I inherited that farmhouse, something had already chosen me. And it waited. I grew up in an old Victorian house that people in town jokingly called the museum. My parents loved its character. Arched doorways, tall windows, and doors that never lined up with their frames. I always pretended the quirks didn't bother me, but even as a kid I felt the house listening whenever it got quiet enough. That night, though, I tried to ignore everything I knew about the place. It was supposed to be fun. My first sleepover without adults hovering. My parents had taken off for their anniversary, and I had the house all to myself. I invited 3 friends, Harper, Lily, and Tess, girls who had seen my house dozens of times but had never stayed the night. We dragged blankets and sleeping bags into the living room, built a tower of snacks on the coffee table, and argued over which scary movie we were brave enough to watch. By 11, the house had settled into its usual chorus, pipes rattling, wood popping, and the far-off sighs of old vents. I'd heard it all before, but my friends jumped at almost every noise. I promised them, "It's just a draft. This place always sounds like it's falling apart, but never actually does." We were half asleep when the knock came. 3 slow taps. Not loud, soft, intentional. It came from upstairs. Every one of us lifted our heads. I sat up straighter, listening so hard it hurt. "Probably pipes," I whispered, though it didn't sound like pipes. Pipes don't knock in a perfect rhythm. Before anyone could breathe, a second knock echoed. Same rhythm, different room. I felt the hair on my arms rise, and Harper whispered exactly what I didn't want admitted out loud. "Claire, someone's upstairs." I tried to convince all of us the knocking had to be the house shifting. Old homes do that. They bang, pop, and groan like they're remembering their past lives. But deep down, even before the second knock, I knew this was different. This felt directed. Lily grabbed my arm. "Your parents left hours ago, right?" "Yeah. No one else has keys." I checked the doors twice. I said it like repeating it made it truer. The lights flickered, the fireplace embering more brightly, as if a sudden draft pushed air through the room. Tess asked, "Do you have, animals in the attic? Squirrels? Raccoons?" "No," I said, too quickly. Because that was when we heard it. Footsteps, but not quick ones. Not frantic animal scrambles. Slow, dragging, weighty steps pacing across the upstairs hallway, right above us. The girls froze. My throat tightened until it hurt. I whispered, "Stay quiet," though none of us were moving. The steps paused, then resumed, heading toward the top of the stairs. A faint humming floated down, raspy, uneven, like someone humming tunelessly through clenched teeth. Every hair on my neck lifted. Harper shook her head violently, whispering through tears, "Claire, someone's in your house. Someone's in your house." The footsteps reached the first stair and creaked it, the sound sharp enough to split the silence. Then another, and another. Someone was coming down. My heart slammed in my chest. I scanned the room for something, anything to use as a weapon, but all we had were pillows and snack wrappers. "We need to hide," I whispered. Tess pointed to the pantry off the kitchen. It was small, cramped, but had a solid door. We grabbed our sleeping bags, and in a frantic blur, we ran. We shoved ourselves into the pantry, 4 girls, shaking, pressed against crates of old canned goods and boxes of pasta. We barricaded the door with 2 heavy storage bins. I pressed my ear against the wood, hardly daring to breathe. The humming grew louder. It was no song I'd ever heard, just a low, breathy vibration like someone humming with a broken throat. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and paused. For a moment, everything went silent, except our tiny, panicked gasps. Then came a long inhale. Wheezing. Whoever it was, whatever it was, stopped exactly where we had been lying minutes before, right in the middle of our abandoned blankets. Lily covered her mouth to stifle a sob. Harper clutched my wrist. Tess whispered, "Claire, please tell me this is a joke." I couldn't. My voice wouldn't work. We heard the shuffle of feet circling the living room, slow and searching. Then that humming again, this time inches from the pantry wall. The sound seeped into the wood, rattling it. The doorknob turned, first lightly, then harder. It twisted back and forth as though whoever was outside couldn't understand why it wouldn't open. Harper whimpered. Tess squeezed her eyes shut. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The knob stopped. Silence stretched out. Too long. Too deliberate. Then from the front of the house came the long groan of the front door unlatching. A slow, dragging creak. A gust of cold air swept in under the pantry door, brushing our ankles. The footsteps moved toward the exit. And then, nothing. When I finally pushed open the pantry door, the living room was empty. The front door stood wide open, swaying slightly. We didn't sleep again. My parents rushed home the moment we called them, and police were already combing through the house when they arrived. The officers walked through each room with flashlights, asking questions we barely answered. I kept expecting to hear humming again, or the slow creak of someone stepping behind us. The police took us upstairs first. I hadn't wanted to go, but they insisted we stay with them. When we reached the hallway, Tess grabbed my hand and gasped. Muddy boot prints. Fresh. Leading from the stairs into each upstairs room, including mine. One print sat directly on my pillow, pressed perfectly as if someone had stood above my head, watching. One officer knelt beside it. The dirt's still wet. Another added, "Rainwater mixed with soil. This was tracked in within the last couple of hours." Harper whispered, "But you checked the doors, Claire. You locked them." I did. My voice cracked. "I swear I did." The officer at the front door confirmed something that chilled me more than the footsteps or humming. "The front lock was picked," he said. "Clean job, almost professional. Whoever came in knew exactly how to get past it without damaging the latch." "But what about the knocking?" Lily asked. "Why knock if they were already inside?" The officers didn't answer. They didn't have one. We followed them outside, where the mud prints continued toward the yard, and then stopped. Not faded, not smudged. Just ended. As if the person had vanished mid-stride. The wind blew across the grass, but nothing moved. We weren't sure if we were safer out here, or if the house behind us was still watching. For weeks I refused to sleep in my room. I stayed with my parents, or one of my friends, or sometimes just slept on the couch with all the lights on. The Victorian house that I'd lived in my entire life suddenly felt like an animal, breathing, listening, waiting. My parents installed new locks, cameras, door sensors, everything modern security could offer, but none of it made the memory of that humming fade. Sometimes, lying awake at night, I imagined footsteps upstairs even when I wasn't there. My body remembered what my mind was trying to forget. The police never found a suspect. No fingerprints, no footprints after the grass, no tool marks on the windows. They shrugged and said maybe it was a trespasser looking for easy targets. But trespassers don't knock, twice. Trespassers don't hum, and trespassers don't disappear into thin air. Harper refuses to come to my house anymore. Tess still jumps at sudden noises. Lily gets quiet whenever someone mentions that night. As for me, I still walk differently through the house, slower, more alert. When floorboards creak, I hold my breath. When doors drift open on their own, I close them gently but firmly. When night settles over the house, I sometimes catch myself whispering, "Is anyone there?" And sometimes, I swear I hear a faint creak in answer. I don't know who or what visited us, but I know one thing. It wasn't the first time. And the house still feels like it's waiting for something. Or someone. Always trust your instincts, especially when fear tells you something is wrong. Locks and walls can create the illusion of safety, but awareness is what protects you. Never ignore the small signals your environment gives you. They might be the only warning you get. Moving into a new home should feel exciting. At least that's what everyone kept telling me. Joel and I had just tied the knot 3 months ago, and our townhouse still felt like a place someone else had left behind. Boxes half unpacked, furniture awkwardly placed, and temporary sheets hanging over the windows. I spent most of the afternoon organizing what I could, making small adjustments to carve out my corner of comfort. Joel had left that morning for his first overnight business trip. He called from the airport, teasing me about my nervous energy. "You're gonna be fine," he said, voice warm over the phone. "Easy for you to say," I laughed. "You won't hear the creaky stairs tonight." "They're charming," he insisted. "They're old," I corrected, feeling the familiar wobble beneath my bare feet as I climbed the stairs to the bedroom. By 11 p.m., I was tucked under the comforter with a book, the house quiet except for the heater clicking on and off. It should have been peaceful. I should have felt safe. Around midnight, a faint noise broke the silence. Footsteps, soft and deliberate, moving across the living room floor. I froze, every muscle tightening. "Joel?" I whispered, even though I knew he was hundreds of miles away. The footsteps stopped. Then a slow scrape, like a sleeve brushing along the wall. My heart raced. I grabbed my phone, hovering over the keypad but not dialing. The house, my supposedly safe space, now felt foreign and threatening. My curiosity and fear wrestled as I crept to the top of the stairs. Holding my breath, I listened. Silence. Then came a voice, low, deliberate. "Hello?" My blood ran cold. I stumbled backward, slamming the bedroom door shut and shoving a dresser against it. My hands shook, fingers fumbling with the phone. Finally, I pressed it to my ear and whispered into the line. 911? "There's someone in my house," I said, barely above a breath. The dispatcher's calm voice steadied me. "Stay on the line, ma'am. Can you describe what you hear?" I pressed my ear to the door. Footsteps, slow, methodical, deliberate, ascending halfway up the stairs. I couldn't tell if the intruder knew exactly where I was, or if he was simply exploring. Every creak of the floorboards sent shivers down my spine. "Ma'am, officers are 3 minutes away. Stay quiet. Don't engage," the dispatcher instructed. Minutes felt like hours. The intruder paused on the staircase, as if listening. My instincts screamed at me not to make a sound. I could feel his presence just beyond the door, waiting, patient. Through the thin walls, I heard him shift, maybe taking a cautious step, maybe leaning closer to the banister. I clenched the phone and tried to control my breathing, counting in my head to calm the panic rising inside me. Outside, I could hear nothing. Inside, the world had contracted to this single room. The intruder's measured breathing, the subtle scuff of his shoes on the stairs. It was surreal. Then, the faint sound of sirens pierced the quiet. Red and blue lights painted slats of color across the ceiling. The intruder hesitated. I held my breath. And just like that, he bolted. Footsteps raced down the stairs and out the back. My legs trembled as relief mixed with lingering terror. Later, officers found pry marks on a downstairs window and footprints in the flower bed. Someone had been watching, waiting for Joel to leave. I realized my world had shifted. The house was no longer just a home. It was a place someone else had claimed, at least temporarily, in my imagination. After the intruder fled, the officers reassured me, took notes, and circled the house for evidence. I sat on the floor, hugging a pillow. Milo's absence from the scene a small comfort. I had begged Joel to bring the dog, but he had stayed behind for the trip. Now I realized how much I had relied on a routine, a sense of control, and how easily it had been shattered. "Ma'am, do you have security cameras or anything installed?" one officer asked. "No," I said. I thought I'd be careful. I didn't expect." My voice faltered. The officer gave me a sympathetic look. "These people often watch for weeks. They pick their moment. Your husband's trip gave him the perfect opportunity." I tried to process that. Days of my life, quietly observed, cataloged, turned into a risk I hadn't even imagined. I felt violated, exposed, and foolish all at once. The dispatcher's words from earlier lingered. "Don't engage." It had been a small instruction, but it had saved me from confronting someone with unknown intentions. I realized how little I truly understood about danger in ordinary spaces, even those I felt I could call home. The officers advised me to stay with a neighbor for the night, but I couldn't leave. Not yet. I wanted to see that my house was still mine, that nothing remained after the intruder had fled. I went room by room, double-checking locks, windows, every door. The faint smell of metal lingered near the window he had pried at, and the flower bed still held his footprints in the softened soil. Even as I secured the house, I knew the fear wouldn't leave me. The experience had rewritten my understanding of safety. There was no returning to normal the moment the door closed behind him. The next few days were surreal. Joel returned, rushing in with a suitcase and a smile that didn't reach his eyes when I recounted the night's events. I didn't know what to do, I admitted, hugging him. "I thought I was going to." My voice trailed off. "You did the right thing," he said firmly. "You stayed safe. That's all that matters." We installed extra locks, a security system, and even motion lights in the yard. I left my bedroom for weeks, choosing the guest room for sleep, even when my husband insisted it was fine to return. The house, once a place of comfort, had become a symbol of vulnerability. Each creak of the floor, each rustle in the bushes, reminded me of that night. I found myself double-checking locks before leaving for work, paying attention to sounds that never used to concern me. The ordinary became significant. The mundane turned potential. I realized how easily trust and routine could be manipulated, and how quickly a home could feel unsafe. The knowledge was unnerving, but necessary. I couldn't undo the experience, but I could adapt. I could prepare. I could survive. Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I could still hear the echo of those soft, deliberate footsteps and the intruder's voice. It reminded me, vigilance isn't paranoia. It's awareness. Months later, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. Joel and I settled into routines, unpacked the last of the boxes, and replaced the temporary curtains with something permanent. The townhouse looked lived in again, cozy, secure, or at least it appeared that way. But I never slept in that bedroom again. Every attempt brought a rush of memory. Soft scraping along the wall, a calm, calculated voice, footsteps ascending and retreating. Milo slept in the hallway if he was around, ears alert even during the quietest nights. I learned to respect my instincts, even when they seemed irrational. I realized that danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it creeps, measured and deliberate, and only awareness and caution can prevent harm. I also understood the fragility of routine and trust. The intruder had counted on predictability, on a life lived without caution, to find his opportunity. My survival was defined not by luck alone, but by a combination of awareness, restraint, and decisive action. And so I carry that lesson forward. Life will always offer moments of false security, spaces where we assume safety. The key isn't fear, it's preparedness, attentiveness, and valuing your own instincts above assumptions. Trust your instincts, respect your awareness, and never assume safety is guaranteed. Ordinary routines can be exploited, and vigilance can save your life. Awareness is not paranoia, it's survival. I always thought marriage would make me feel anchored, steady, like stepping into a life that was finally secure, and in many ways, it did. My husband Daniel meant well when he picked the house at the edge of the ravine. He loved its quiet, its tall windows, the way the trees filtered sunlight into the living room. Peaceful, he'd said. You're gonna love the silence. I didn't tell him silence had never been comforting to me. Silence lets you hear things you'd rather believe aren't there. A month after the wedding, Daniel left for a week-long work trip, kissing my forehead and insisting I'd be fine. I nodded along, pretending bravery I didn't feel. The first evening alone, I tried filling the air with noise, TV, music, podcasts, but the house swallowed sound like it had a hunger for it. By nightfall, the quiet pressed down so thickly I could feel it settle on my shoulders. Every floorboard groaned, long and strained, as if something heavy shifted above me. I curled on the couch and muttered, "It's nothing. Houses make noise." But I didn't believe it. Around midnight, scraping echoed from the attic, soft at first, then louder, like someone dragging furniture across bare wood. I froze. We hadn't stored a single thing up there. I whispered into the empty room, probably an animal. But even saying it felt like lying to myself. The scraping kept going, deliberate, steady, purposeful, and the silence between each drag felt almost listening. That was when the dread settled in my stomach, heavy and cold. I realized I wasn't as alone in the house as I wanted to be. I tried ignoring the sounds, tried pretending they were leaves or branches scraping the roof. But deep down, I knew the noise was inside the house, inside the attic. And it wasn't frantic the way animals move. It was slow, patient. Scrape, pause, scrape again. Finally, I grabbed my phone flashlight and walked toward the stairs, telling myself I just needed proof it was harmless. As I climbed, the temperature dropped so suddenly I wrapped my arms around myself. At the top stood the attic door, plain, white, and slightly swollen from humidity. I hesitated, whispering, "Just open it. Just look." My fingers trembled on the knob. The moment the latch clicked, a rush of cold, stagnant air spilled over me, like the attic exhaled, and the scraping stopped instantly. Not faded. Stopped. That kind of silence doesn't happen with animals. I didn't step inside. Something about the blackness beyond the doorway felt wrong, like walking into someone's open mouth. Backing away, I shut the door hard and stumbled down the stairs 2 at a time. That was when the house shifted, like weight moved inside its walls. By the time I reached the bedroom, my hands were shaking so badly I barely managed to lock the door. I sat on the floor, listening to my heartbeat thudding against my ribs. Then the footsteps started. Slow, measured, rhythmic, walking the hallway that should have been empty. I whispered to myself, Daniel would tell me to stay calm. But calm wasn't possible when something unseen was pacing outside my door. The footsteps halted right outside the bedroom. I held my breath, praying I imagined it. My heart pounded so loudly I couldn't tell where one sound ended and the next began. Then the doorknob twitched. Once, twice, like someone testing it. I threw myself against the door, pressing my full weight into it. The knob turned slowly, painfully, as if whoever, or whatever, was on the other side had all the time in the world. The pressure pushed back against my hands. A voice in my head whispered, "Don't let it open." I braced my feet and leaned harder. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the pressure stopped, but the silence didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. I heard breathing, deep, heavy exhalations inches beyond the doorframe, the kind of breath you hear when someone stands too close behind you. I wanted to scream, but fear pinned the sound inside my throat. After what felt like minutes, the breathing retreated. Floorboards groaned as footsteps moved down the stairs, slow and unhurried, like the visitor knew I wouldn't dare come out. I sat on the floor until dawn, gripping a fireplace poker I'd taken from the hearth. My back ached from leaning against the door, but I didn't dare shift. Every so often, a board creaked somewhere in the house. I flinched every time. When daylight finally spilled through the curtains, I felt like I'd survived something I shouldn't try to explain, and part of me feared the thing that tried my door would return as soon as night did. When Daniel got home, I broke down before I could even form a sentence. He called our neighbor, then the police, and within an hour the house was full of strangers walking through rooms I refused to enter alone. One officer went straight for the attic. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, arms wrapped tightly around myself, waiting to hear what he'd say. A few minutes later, he called down, "You said you haven't stored anything up here?" Daniel answered, "We haven't touched the attic." The officer came down slowly, his expression too controlled. "There's a spot where the insulation's been flattened. Large area. Looks like someone's been lying up there for a while." My stomach dropped. "There's more," he added. "The vent slats facing your bedroom. Someone positioned them so they could see straight through." Daniel's mouth fell open. "Are you saying someone watched?" The officer finished. "Yeah, for some time." My legs went numb. I gripped the railing to stay upright. They checked windows, locks, the perimeter. Nothing was broken, nothing damaged, but in the attic window, coated in years of dust, was a single handprint, a perfect one. The officer held up both his and Daniel's hands, comparing. "Doesn't match either of you." Daniel whispered, "Then whose is it?" No one answered. They didn't have to. The house suddenly felt smaller, closer, like the walls held secrets I'd never asked to inherit. For weeks, I couldn't sleep without lights on. Even then, every shadow felt like a person watching from the corner. Daniel offered to move to a hotel, but I insisted staying put was the only way to feel like I wasn't running. I wanted my house back, the one that was supposed to be our beginning, not a warning. But nighttime changed everything. I'd lie awake listening for footsteps. Sometimes I imagined them. Other times I wasn't sure. The attic door creaked on its hinges even when no one touched it. The hall felt colder than the rest of the house, and every so often, I'd swear I heard breathing just behind the door again. One evening, Daniel stood with me at the base of the attic stairs. "We can move," he said softly. "We don't owe this place anything." I nodded, but part of me stared at that door, wondering if someone had ever really left, or if something was still up there, waiting for the right moment to come down the stairs again. Eventually, we put the house up for sale. I didn't go back inside the attic. I didn't need to. Some spaces feel wrong the moment you stand near them. Even now, in a different home far from the ravine, I sleep lightly. I check doors twice, sometimes 3 times. Silence no longer feels peaceful. It feels like an invitation for something to return. And every now and then, in the stillness before sleep, I swear I hear it again. That faint, patient scrape from somewhere above me. Never dismiss your instincts. Fear is not weakness. It is information. Listen to the signals your environment gives you, and trust your intuition when something feels wrong. It may be the only protection you have when no one else can see the danger. I never planned on spending my weekend house sitting, but when my older sister, Emily, asked me to watch her golden retriever, Milo, I didn't hesitate. I'd been between freelance projects and honestly needed a change of scenery. Her place sat on 2 acres of quiet suburban land. quiet enough to feel peaceful, but isolated enough that the silence sometimes pressed on you like a weight. I grew up in a busy neighborhood full of traffic and porch lights. Emily, on the other hand, loved the idea of space to breathe. Her house backed up to a wooded trail and had one of those long gravel driveways that make you feel like you're entering a movie set, the kind where nothing bad happens until it suddenly does. When she left for her weekend work retreat, she hugged me on the porch. "It'll be easy," she promised. "Feed Milo twice a day, water the plant by the window if you remember, and don't let Milo trick you into giving him extra treats." I laughed. "I can handle a dog and a fern." Milo barked once, wagging his whole body as if he agreed. For most of the day, it really was an easy gig. I made dinner, put on a documentary, and stretched across the giant sectional couch like I owned the place. The house felt warm, safe, familiar. Around 9 p.m., the wind outside died down. I didn't even notice the quiet at first, not until Milo lifted his head from my lap, ears straight forward, body tense. "What's up, buddy?" I whispered. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He just stared at the front door, muscles vibrating like he was ready for something I couldn't yet see. The silence hung heavy across the living room as I muted the documentary. For a few seconds, all I heard was the refrigerator humming and Milo's soft breathing. Then, so faint I almost convinced myself I imagined it, came the slow crunch of gravel outside. Someone was walking up the driveway. I sat up straighter and leaned toward the nearest window. "Probably a neighbor," I whispered, though my voice wasn't convincing even to myself. Milo's low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. He wasn't the type to growl without a reason. That's when instinct told me something was wrong. I turned off the lamp, letting the room collapse into darkness. I edged to the blinds and lifted one slat just enough to see outside. A man stood at the end of the driveway, perfectly still, hands at his sides. He wasn't wearing reflective gear, or walking a dog, or doing anything that made sense for a nighttime walk. And he was staring directly at the house. "Okay. Not great," I muttered. He moved slowly, almost deliberately, stepping into the shadows as he headed toward the porch. Milo followed every step with his eyes. I backed away from the window and grabbed his collar. The faint clink of metal hit the door. Someone was testing the handle. My pulse surged. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Who's out there?" Silence. Then came 3 knocks. Slow, heavy, intentional. I stumbled toward the old landline phone on the wall, hands shaking as I dialed the local non-emergency number. "Hi. Someone's trying to get into the house," I whispered. "I'm house-sitting for my sister. Please send someone." As I spoke, a new sound crept through the kitchen. Glass rattling. Someone was at the back door, too. Milo's growl shifted toward the kitchen, his tail straight, his whole body rigid. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, clutching the phone so hard my hand cramped. The back doorknob turned, just a slight, careful twist. Whoever was there was testing it gently, like they wanted to open it without being heard. I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to stay silent. "Officers are on the way," the dispatcher whispered into my ear. Her calm tone didn't match the way my heart thundered. "What do I do?" I breathed. "Stay in a room with a lock if possible. Don't confront anyone." Milo pushed against my thigh, not panicked but alert. "Ready." I nudged him toward the bedroom at the end of the hall, and we slipped inside. I locked the door quietly, then backed away. The house settled around us, creaking in a way that made every sound suspicious. For a moment, the doorknob stopped moving. Whoever was out there was listening, waiting. I crouched beside the bed, Milo's head resting on my shoulder. His breathing was shallow, controlled, the way a dog prepares for a threat. Then came footsteps, light ones. retreating across the patio. Was he leaving? Circling? Trying another entry? Minutes crawled by. The dispatcher told me officers were close. I kept the phone pressed to my ear until suddenly, faint but unmistakable, red and blue lights washed through the bedroom window. The back doorknob released instantly, like whoever was there had been holding it. Footsteps retreated through the yard. Fast. I felt Milo tense and let out one sharp bark, the first loud sound since the whole ordeal started. Within moments, someone knocked loudly on the front door. "Police! You can come out!" I didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. 2 officers swept through the house with flashlights while I stayed in the living room with Milo pressed against my legs. The air felt colder somehow, like the house hadn't fully shaken off the presence of whoever had been trying to get inside. An officer named Ramirez returned from checking the backyard. "No sign of anyone," he said, though the tone of his voice implied he wasn't convinced. "You said he was at both doors?" I nodded. "Front door first, then the back door." He tried both handles. Ramirez exchanged a look with his partner before gesturing me outside. "Show us where you saw him standing." We walked to the driveway, my breath fogging in the night air. Under the flashlight beams, clear footprints led from the street straight toward the porch, not wandering, not accidental. "He came with a purpose," Ramirez said under his breath. We moved around the side of the house toward the gate leading to the backyard. Milo followed, tail down but curious. That's where we found it. Deep scratches around the side gate latch, fresh ones. Metal shavings littered the ground like glitter. Someone had spent time there, trying to pry it, testing it, failing. A chill crawled up my spine. He was trying to get in from here too. Ramirez knelt, examining the grooves. "This wasn't an opportunistic passerby," he said. "He brought tools." Tools. Someone had walked up a dark driveway at night carrying tools to break into a house he believed was empty. The thought made my stomach drop. The second officer walked the fence line again. He knew the patrol car scared him off, but he'll avoid lights next time. The idea that there could even be a next time twisted something tight inside me. I reached for Milo's collar, needing something steady to hold on to. After the officers left, the house felt too quiet, too hollow. I didn't want to be there anymore, not even with Milo beside me. But I couldn't exactly abandon my sister's place at midnight. I double-checked every lock, turned on every exterior light, and pushed a chair under the front doorknob, something I used to see in movies and never understood until now. Milo stuck by my side, pacing in slow circles around the living room. Every once in a while, he'd look at the front door like he was making sure it hadn't moved. I was grateful he barked earlier. If he hadn't reacted, I might have dismissed the whole thing until it was too late. I slept on the couch with Milo curled against my legs, one hand resting on his fur like an anchor. Every crunch of wind-blown leaves made me bolt upright, listening. The next morning, Emily rushed home early after I called her. She hugged me hard, eyes wide with guilt. "I'm so sorry, Rachel. Oh my God. I never thought something like this would happen here." "Me neither," I said. It didn't feel random. Police patrolled the area for a few days, but they never found the man. The scratches, the footprints, the attempt at both doors, whatever he wanted, he wasn't just wandering. I still house-sit for Emily sometimes, but I pay attention now. To footsteps, to instinct, to Milo's ears when they twitch at something I can't hear yet. Because I learned something that night. Safety isn't guaranteed just because you expect it. Always trust your instincts, especially when they whisper instead of shout. Danger doesn't always arrive loudly, and ignoring the first signs can cost you more than peace of mind. Pay attention, stay aware, and never assume that it could never happen here. I had been waiting for this weekend for months. My parents were going to a wedding out of town, and they finally said yes. I could have my first big sleepover. I invited my closest friends, Evan, Mark, and Tyler. The plan was simple: pizza, video games, and staying up way past our bedtimes. By the time the sun set, the living room looked like a battlefield of empty boxes and soda cans. Tyler was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through streaming options. Evan had claimed the controller for Mario Kart, while Mark was debating which horror movie we should watch. Not clowns, Tyler insisted. Clowns aren't real threats, Mark argued. Evan shrugged. People are worse anyway. We laughed at that, not realizing just how right he was. By 1 a.m., we had cooled off from our video game frenzy. The house was quiet except for the occasional rumble of cars passing outside. We heard the distant hum of the streetlights buzzing. I was stretched across the floor, eating the last slice of pizza, when a sound pierced the night. Shouting, abrupt, angry. Evan muted the game instantly. What the heck? I rose to the window, peeking through the blinds. Across the street, a woman in pajamas was trembling on her porch. A man pounded on her door violently. That's Mrs. Daly, I whispered. She lives alone. The man's voice roared. Let me in! The four of us froze, hearts hammering. Tyler whispered, Should we call someone? Mark shook his head. We're kids. We can't do anything. I remember the way the man's eyes scanned the street and then locked onto our house. The blood in my veins turned ice cold. He sees us, I said, my voice cracking. Get down! We dropped behind the couch, every nerve screaming that this was far worse than any game or movie we'd ever played. We stayed as low as possible, trying not to breathe too loudly. The man's footsteps crunched across our sidewalk. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely clutch the blanket we had draped over the couch. He thinks we called the cops, Evan whispered. Mark crawled across the floor to the kitchen, trying to stay hidden. The phone was old and corded, thankfully still working. He lifted it just enough to whisper to the operator, 911. Someone's at the house, across the street. They're violent. I peeked cautiously. The man had reached our front door. He tested the knob, shaking it hard as if trying to force it open. His voice carried through the room. You boys better open this door. Every word made my stomach churn. My friends and I clutched each other behind the couch. I felt Evan's arm trembling against mine. Minutes dragged on like hours. The banging stopped suddenly. Silence. I listened, straining to hear anything over my own heartbeat. Then footsteps moved along the side of the house. My stomach sank as I realized he was making his way to the backyard. Basement window, I whispered. It doesn't lock, right? We didn't have time to debate. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen and shone it down the side. Muddy footprints led directly to the basement. I swallowed hard. We were trapped in a quiet war zone we hadn't signed up for. Every second felt like a lifetime as we waited for help, knowing that one wrong sound could be the last mistake we ever made. Then, faint but clear, the wail of sirens cut through the night. I could hear the man's footsteps retreat as soon as the sirens neared. He bolted into the shadows, vanishing between houses. My chest heaved. I couldn't stop shaking. We stayed behind the couch until police cars pulled up, lights flashing red and blue through the blinds. When the officers entered, they asked us to explain everything. I stuttered, recounting what we had seen. The shouting, the banging, the footsteps around the house. My voice cracked more than once. One of the officers nodded gravely. This man, he's known to be violent. Recently released, has a history. Looks like he was after the woman across the street. You kids did exactly what you should have. Stayed put. I felt a mix of relief and terror. Relief because we were alive. Terror because I realized how close he had been to seeing us, to making a choice we couldn't control. Another officer went around to the basement window. Muddy footprints under the ledge confirmed our fears. He had been crouched there, watching us before we even noticed. The idea that someone could have been staring at us, silently, just feet away, made my stomach churn. I hugged Evan and Tyler, who were still pale and shaking. Even Mark, normally calm, looked like he might collapse. The police reassured us that he had fled for now. but I couldn't shake the feeling that our ordinary street had suddenly become a place where danger walked freely. That night, I realized that horror movies had been safe. This, real people with real intent, wasn't a game. I couldn't sleep. Not really. Not until I knew the officers were gone, and the neighborhood had returned to its false calm. The following day, the house felt different. Every corner seemed to hold a shadow. Every creak of the floorboard made my heart leap. My parents were gone, and even though it was supposed to be fun, the experience had changed everything. We talked about it cautiously, trying to make sense of what had happened. Tyler admitted he had wanted to hide and peek out the window, but now he said he never would again. Evan said he had thought about fighting back but realized we were too small. I realized that the intruder's focus had been methodical. He had watched Mrs. Daly for days, probably waiting for a chance to strike. And in that moment, he had considered us, kids, interfering. It was a lesson in reality I wasn't prepared for. Bad things happen to ordinary people, and sometimes, even when you think you're invisible, someone is paying attention. The police suggested extra locks on the basement window and recommended neighborhood watch programs. I helped make sure the window was secure, checking every corner twice, obsessively. Every routine chore now carried the weight of caution. Even after the threat passed, I couldn't shake the image of his eyes scanning our house, the way his shadow moved across the porch. It stayed with me, lingering in the edges of my memory. By the next weekend, we tried to play video games again, but the laughter felt forced. The house didn't feel the same. I knew deep down that safety was something fragile, something that had to be earned and maintained. Months later, things returned to a kind of normal. The neighborhood police checked in, and Mrs. Daly installed new locks and cameras. I learned to respect my own instincts, never ignoring the small warnings. A creak in the floor, a strange shadow, a voice that didn't belong. Evan, Mark, Tyler, and I stayed friends, but we no longer took safety for granted. Sleepovers felt less like fun and more like responsibility. We understood now that the world wasn't always safe, and that being observant and cautious could save lives. I replayed that night in my head more times than I'd like to admit. The man could have been anyone, any stranger with violent intent, and we were lucky to survive because we acted carefully, stayed hidden, and called for help. It changed me. I realized courage isn't always about standing up and confronting danger. Sometimes courage is staying quiet, keeping yourself safe, and trusting the people trained to handle it. The lesson stuck with me. Safety is never guaranteed, and awareness can be the difference between fear and survival. Pay attention to your surroundings, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the importance of caution. Courage isn't always confrontation. Sometimes it's knowing when to stay safe and call for help. I'd been working 12-hour shifts at the hospital for weeks, and by the time I unlocked the front door of my townhouse, my body felt like it weighed a ton. Rain drizzled against the windows, pattering softly, a rhythm that should have been calming. I kicked off my shoes, tugged my jacket off, and walked toward the kitchen, the smell of leftover pasta from last night teasing my stomach. Then I heard it. Not a thump, not the usual squeak of the stairs. A hum, low, vibrating, like a man trying to sing without opening his mouth. "Please, don't be raccoons again," I whispered, kneeling beside the crawlspace door under the stairs. My hand hovered over the padlock. Something felt off, warm, crooked, tampered with. I froze. The hum stopped instantly, like it had been listening to me. My pulse jumped. My phone was on the counter. I debated grabbing it, but froze instead, staring at the dark gap beneath the stairs. Every instinct screamed that I shouldn't open it, but every nerve in my body ached to know what was there. I backed away slowly, glancing at the windows. Rain continued its soft drumbeat, but now the house felt alive. Watching. Waiting. I didn't know if I wanted to call someone. and yet I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. Something was inside. By the time midnight rolled around, I had eaten the pasta, trying to distract myself with the TV, but the storm had worsened. Thunder rattled the windows, and lightning made shadows dance across the walls. Then came a clang from the crawlspace. My heart skipped a beat. A cough followed. Dry, hoarse, distressed. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, dialing 911. Whispering, I tried to explain what was happening. "Ma'am, stay in a safe room," the dispatcher said. "Officers are on the way." I backed down the hall, eyes glued to the crawlspace. Then I saw it. A pale arm, long, thin, reaching out from the gap beneath the door. Fingers splayed, dirty nails scraping across the floor. I screamed, bolted into my bedroom, slammed the door, and shoved the dresser against it. The arm disappeared. I could hear it, though. A faint scratching, like it was probing, testing boundaries. My chest heaved. Every rational part of me knew I might be imagining it. But I had seen the arm. I had felt the presence. I stayed on the bed, phone clutched like a lifeline, listening to the rain hammer against the windows. Every shadow felt like it could be him. Every creak, every draft made me flinch. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even dare close my eyes. The sound of sirens was like a lifeline. I rushed to the door as officers entered the townhouse, flashlights cutting through the dark corners. They pried open the crooked padlock and swept the crawlspace. "Empty," Officer Marsh said. "Just dust, insulation, old wood, no footprints, no signs of forced entry." I shook, clutching my sweater. "No, I saw his arm. Someone was there." The officers exchanged a look, skeptical but calm. "Ma'am, buildings like this have strange echoes, shadows. It can play tricks on your mind." "I'm telling you what I saw," I said, voice tight. It was real. They advised me to stay with a friend for the night. I refused. I wasn't leaving my home. I had lived here for years. This was my place. But even after they left, I felt it, watching, waiting. Every shadow in the house seemed heavier, every noise louder. My heartbeat wouldn't slow. I knew I wasn't imagining it entirely. I woke to a creak, soft, deliberate. My bedroom closet door was slowly opening. A dark shape shifted inside, crouched low. I grabbed a lamp, heart hammering, every instinct screaming to run. Then I heard him, a whisper, low, cruel. "You locked me in the wrong place." Panic surged. I bolted down the stairs, grabbing my keys as lights flickered violently. I reached for the front door, and a hand clamped over my mouth from behind. He was impossibly tall, thin, dirt smeared across his face, mouth stretched into a wide grin. "I lived here first," he murmured. He dragged me backward toward the crawlspace. I kicked, screamed, clawed at him. Thunder cracked, making the house shudder. I could feel every muscle in my body screaming to escape, my lungs burning. And then, just as suddenly, he released me. I stumbled to the living room. The house was silent, empty. By dawn, neighbors had called the police. The front door was wide open, couch overturned, lamp shattered, gouges in the floor where something heavy had been dragged. The crawlspace door was ajar, empty, except for a small piece of my uniform, and a new padlock installed from the PI. Inside. Officer Marsh shook his head. He's been using crawl spaces in abandoned homes, moving unseen, thought he could stay unnoticed. I shivered, realizing just how close he had been. My home, my sanctuary, had been violated. And even now, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, somewhere, watching.